right, so I'm excited. Welcome to Her Third Act, the podcast where we celebrate the journey and recognize that a woman's life doesn't slow down, it levels up. I'm your host, Bisha Hawkins, and each week we sit with women, and it's not each week, every now and then, apparently. We sit with women who've lived, learned, pivoted, and are asking the powerful question, what's next? This is a space for reflection, reinvention, and bold new beginnings because her third act is just getting started. All right. So I am so excited. So this is my second interview, and I've been chasing Molly for quite some time. Molly Cate out of Nashville is an impact entrepreneur, a mindfulness practitioner and coach, and a Zen movement instructor. She's passionate about helping people find their flow and be more alive, present, and focused. And so with that, I want to welcome Molly into her Zoom account that she so graciously allowed me to use because we've been struggling. So welcome, Molly.
Thank you so much. What an honor it is to be here with you and your beautiful smiling face, to listen to some Dr. Dre together, and then to do this. I love it already. I'm in.
All right, I appreciate it. And you've been serious about this. Like you've been taking notes. You did some homework, and I appreciate it. I appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate really being asked. There's two of the many things that I really believe in life is the power of questions. I know we share that, kind of communications background. I had a journalism professor give me a book for graduation, and there was a quote in there by Eugene Ionesco that I always kept at my desk over the years. It says, "It's not the answer that enlightens, it's the question." So
that just gave me chills.
Yeah,
thank you for sharing that.
Really believe that. So honored to be here. And the other thing I was going to say is time, to share time with someone and to have someone, show an interest in, what we're doing, how we're growing, how we're evolving. I think that's a really beautiful, unique thing. I take it seriously and, really hope I can say something today that helps someone or provides you the content that you need to grow and flourish. And we get to learn a little something about each other along the way.
Well, you've already started. I mean, thank you for sharing that quote. I mean, that was so we haven't even really gotten going. All right. So as you know, we break up this the format is broken up into three parts. And so we're going to start with the girl, little Molly. Tell us about little Molly. What lit up little Molly? What was little Molly all about?
Okay. So this was such a great question, by the way, because I had to go back and really think about this. And then I thought to myself, oh, wow, well, a lot of the things that little Molly really liked have made a comeback. So that's cool.
Okay. All right.
I think I had lost them for a while. So let's see. Little Molly was I'm the youngest of 5 kids, and so there's a really big age gap between me and my siblings. And so in a lot of ways, I spent a lot of my, I had a great childhood, don't get me wrong, but I did spend a lot of time wondering, why am I in this situation? My older brother was 17 years older than me. And so I spent a lot of time learning to observe people, asking deep questions. I got the fortunate experience to be able to spend more time with my parents and my grandparents than my siblings did because, everybody was a lot older by the time I came along. So the power of storytelling, deep conversations, gleaming wisdom, laughing about life, because, you have to get to a point where you're cool to do that. When you're not in the thick of it anymore. So this kind of reflective wisdom, I got a lot of that from my parents and my grandparents. I loved to be outside when I was a kid. I love to move. So I played sports. I was a tennis player. Liked to be in nature, exploring around. My mom was an interior designer, so I spent a lot of time shopping with her or like redoing things, wallpaper and couches and things like that. My dad was worked a lot because we had, all these kids. Both of my parents did not come from much, so they were working hard all the time. That was a really big value that I got, and that nothing's going to be given to you. You got to bust it, always be thinking ahead. So I got a lot of that from my dad, but then I also got a lot of playfulness from him. Uh,
Mm.
you know, um, so lots of great time with him. Fishing, exploring. We're always on the water, doing things like that, playing tennis, riding lawnmower rides, things that I really loved. So we moved every like 4 to 5 years in my life. So my dad was in sales. My dad was like a hustler in the best way, not in a in a bad way. But he had his first kid at 18, maybe 17 actually, and then he had me when he was 37. So he was getting after it. Always again didn't come from money, didn't ever really have a college degree. He had an associate's degree, but so he was always thinking ahead, like a survivor. How can I make more? How can I provide more? How can I be more? And so we moved, every 4 to 5 years, kind of between the same places, Northern Kentucky, Cincinnati, Chattanooga, and Atlanta. And we kind of went, we had a brief stint in South Carolina, but we kind of went between these places a lot. And my dad would work his network and get these jobs. So I learned to be, I had to speak up and be outgoing, or I wasn't ever going to be able to make friends.
Yeah.
And wasn't really ever very good at putting down roots, to be honest, because I kind of knew we weren't going to be there very long. And I found that I was anticipating a lot, which is something, I see now in my business career, like that's helpful and valuable, not so much in the personal life
I,
side of
I was
things.
going to ask you, yeah,
Yeah.
how does that, what does that
So
look like? Yeah.
I did this experiment for a while in my meditation practice for like some years, where you categorize your thoughts. And, probably like 90% of mine are uh, things about being prepared for what might happen. Little things
Mhm.
like what I'm going to do after this phone call. And well, if I don't have this, for lunch, maybe I'll do this and I'll go there. To big things like life stuff, like, well, catastrophic thinking, like, well, what happens if this horrible thing happens with my son, then I'm going to do this, or, where am I going to live next? So I'm always kind of like future tripping. And so, yeah, that was a big piece of me. I really, when I was a kid, loved to dance. My grandparents I would go to their house on Friday nights and we would watch Solid Gold and I would dance in front of the TV. I just loved it. I loved it so much. I just remember like Dionne Warwick, like yesterday. I really loved other cultures a lot. And I loved sports. Like I said, the Olympics. I really wanted to be an Olympian,
Uh,
or
uh, for tennis?
anything really. But yeah,
Anything.
tennis was
Okay.
kind of, yeah. I liked things that weren't easy. Like when we would play, how you play with your friends when you're little. I always wanted to have some sort of struggle or strife involved in the situation. We're in the wilderness and we have to find our food, or and I remember a lot of my friends, little girlfriends, were like, let's talk about my wedding, or I want to have this mansion. And I was like, what? No, it never really appealed to me.
You wanted to play
Um,
Survivor. You
I
want,
did. Yeah. I don't know what that says about me, but I'll say travel, was also, we didn't really do a lot of that when I was growing up, but I did love it, particularly to the beach. We would go one time of year to South Carolina, and I got to go by myself with my parents. And so, because my siblings were so much older, and I
Right.
loved
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
So I guess just a few more things I would add would be I got the message from my mom and my grandmother really loud and clear about like being an independent woman, and I've talked to my sisters about this and they didn't necessarily get it. But again, I think it's because I came along. My mom was like 38 when she had me, which in 1975 was not really like very
Right.
common. And so I kind of get the impression from listening to my siblings' stories about growing up that my parents were like, they were surviving, They were like in the thick of it. They had 4 kids, these pretty close in age, no money. And it was like, how are we going to make this work? And that was kind of the energy that my siblings grew up in, which was different than mine. It wasn't like I was totally on easy street, um, but it was like not quite as intense. So I got
Right.
this reflective time, and my mom and my grandma were very adamant, like, don't depend on a man for things. Have a job, have a career. We didn't get to do those things. So you do them, like make something of yourself. Um,
That
be
is interesting.
strong. Like, I really got that. Yeah. And I talked to my sisters about it, and they're like, they just give me this look, like you're giving me, like, no. What? We never got that. So yeah, I got a lot of messages about those things, and I kind of liked it. I liked to play like Office also when I was little, and we're gonna run shit. And yeah, I liked that, a lot.
What
So.
does that do to, or does this impact your and your sister's relationship? The not only the age difference, but also the different ways in which you were raised,
For
the
sure.
mindset.
Yeah, I try to think about the things that we have in common more because I see those a lot in them. But again, all due respect and love my family, but we look at the world a lot differently,
Okay.
me
Yeah.
and my
Yeah.
siblings. I mean, it's things like this. Um, it's also, something maybe I'll get into a little bit later in the podcast, but even just like generationally, and like the way that we look at the world. My family is very conservative, with historically very Catholic. I never really, I tried to do all that stuff, but we had some real differences, like racially, like race is a really big thing. Uh,
Yeah.
my son is mixed, my first like really, love that I really cared about in high school, was Black. It was a really big epic disaster. And so
Oh, wow.
yeah, so I grew up like, again, I loved them, but I knew we had some real core beliefs. I didn't have enough nerve to speak up about those things for a long time, you know.
Yeah.
But it was really, we were different. So, now I think that seems so long ago, but it really made an impact on me, like this need to kind of define myself as being different, but also wanting to belong, and wanting to be like, I primarily went to Catholic schools growing up. And so everybody had these big families and they all seemed really tight, and then there was me, like, hey, I'm here and they're all over here. I don't even really remember living with a lot of my siblings, to be honest.
Right.
So yeah, it's, but I did really love, anytime. So when I was in like 4th grade, we moved to Atlanta. And so my family originally was from Cincinnati. And then when I was a kid, we moved to Chattanooga. So I lived there from I was like 3 to 9. And then my parents were always like city people though. They grew up in a like more of a big city environment. And when we moved to Atlanta, I saw this side of my parents that I hadn't seen before. Like we were eating at like Chinese restaurants, and we'd go to the farmer's market or whatever in downtown Atlanta. My dad was in the food service industry, so we did a lot of things involving food. And they were selling like, all this like food from other places. Like, I remember seeing all these like octopus lined up in this like Asian market. I was just like, oh my God. I got to be in this tennis league called Alta, and we traveled all around Atlanta playing tennis in like different neighborhoods, and I felt so alive. I loved that, you know. We only lived there 1 year, and then we went back to Cincinnati, and it was very much kind of more in a homogenistic type situation, neighborhood. But that really brought me alive, like seeing different things. How do other places work, other cultures, other, movement, like a variety of things. I really loved that as a kid.
It is so fascinating that it seems everything in your life, um, you know, prepared or nurtured you to become the person who might fall in love with someone outside of their race, right?
Mhm.
Like, your
Yeah,
mom and your grandma. Yeah,
natural to me. Like, yeah.
yeah, right. Like your mom and grandma, like
Hmm.
telling you to be independent, and introducing you to different things. And so, yeah, you're gonna grow up and
Hmm. Yeah.
do, do different things, right? So, that's
So I was thinking about it when I was preparing for this. Like growing up the way that I did, it really taught me some really important things, though, that I don't like, that became very real to me, like seriously real, which is, through my siblings, I got to see, like, it was sort of this experiment, Um, a person's decisions impact their life, like you choose not to go to college, this is what that looks like. You do this is what that looks like, etc. So it was like, oh, I had a very like solid understanding of a person's choices lead to these outcomes.
yes,
And I also really knew that like struggling financially was a real thing, having to make a living and support a family. Like I saw the impact of that in my uh, grandparents. So it was very like, I got the work hard, you're responsible for your own outcome message as a kid, really loud and clear. And I think I really like appreciated the gravity of it. I don't think I really realized that till later in life. Um, and then like also just on the unpleasant side of things, like, you know, racism and misogyny and like this shit is fucking real. And, like you don't want to really admit it on one hand because it's so stupid, but on the other, it like impacts your soul, like at your a
oh boy.
person's like identity, soul level, it's so powerful. And that shit goes deep and it comes out in horrible ways that are like damaging
It's
and
trauma. It is trauma.
traumatic. I was just gonna say, yeah. And so, I did not grow up like sheltered from those things.
Mhm.
Um, and I'm kind of have, I think, finally realized how thankful I am for that, you know?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
I didn't really ever expect life to be easy, you know? When I was a
Yeah.
kid, like I didn't ever have any visions about growing up and this is it's gonna be easy street. I didn't never got that.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. All right. Well, what I get from this first part is that I
What's
get
easier? This
hard
is a
work.
good
Well, I
question.
get hard work, one. Like, and I get that also just in the couple of times we've talked, like this, like you are a hard worker. And so, but I also get like you love outside and I mean, seems like you had a beautiful, beautiful childhood. I mean, that's awesome. I'm not jealous.
I'm thankful for it.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. So maybe we can transition to the woman. So the
Mhm.
woman you became, just maybe starting with your early adult life. I know you went to
I went to
I went to
almost
lips.
every college in Tennessee.
Really?
Let's see, I started out at MTSU. I went
Oh,
there for
okay.
2 years and then I transferred to Knoxville. for 2.5 years, and then I dropped out. And let me back up for a minute and preface something by saying that my early adulthood was not the best time for me. This is where we're going to take a left turn. So lots of things there we can talk about. And then I had my son while I was on this break of finding myself. And then I went back after I had him and finished at UTC. So
Okay, so
UT Chattanooga, for those of you that are
UT
unfamiliar with
chat,
it.
baby.
Yeah.
So you went
Which
to
is cool now, by the
MTSU,
way. It was not
huh?
when I went there. It's a cool university now. It was not when I went there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So many hills. My
Oh
goodness.
yeah. Yeah.
I mean, steep hills there.
Hmm.
So you went to MTSU, then UT Knox, then it took a break, had baby, and went to UT Chat.
Yeah.
And
And
I yeah, it's I went to TSU, Austin P, took a break, had babies,
oh
and
wow.
then went back to Austin P.
Right on. Yeah, I did not have a linear path.
You're right.
Sounds like you didn't either. Yeah. It always really resonates with me when you read things in like these self-help books and spiritual things where it says, progress is not linear and this and that. I'm like, okay, good. I'm doing something right.
So how old were you when you had your son?
Okay, so I was 22, and but I had a really big fallout with my parents my senior year of with the racial stuff. And to
Uh,
be honest, it really impacted me, and I don't think I really understood it till later. And I'm not saying like this was everything to blame, but I I always felt really always wanted to honor my parents, and I felt really like, gosh, they had me so late in life, and I want to be a good kid. I want to make them proud. I want to, do all these things. And so when it came to this racial stuff, though, like they really lost their mind over it, and it like really fucked with me, at like the deepest level. And I kind of entered this phase eventually. It took me a little while to get there, but over the course of like my college years of like, fuck this. I
yeah.
kind of turned into like this big rebel. And I'd kind of go back and forth, like I know I should be going to class and I know I should like join a sorority. And then the sorority had race stuff in it too. And I was never a conformist, I don't know why the fuck I ever thought that was going to work for me. But I tried all this stuff,
Yeah.
um, and so, and I was really lost, to be honest. And I kept trying not to be, I quit playing tennis. That had always been like a very foundational thing for me. So I did not have a lot of structure. I hated MTSU. It was like so lame in 1993. Sorry, Blue Raiders, but it was. And it was like not really what I thought my college experience was going to be like. I did not know what I wanted to major in. Um, but I knew all this shit was really important. And I knew that if I had a college degree, my chances of having a better life were going to be a lot better because I had seen it with my siblings.
Right,
So it
right.
felt really important and I didn't know what to do. And I was hurting,
Yeah.
emotionally. So perfect disastrous mix. Even still to this day, like when I don't know what to do, that's a real trigger for me. Because again, I
Mm,
like to be in, like my way of, I think, dealing with all the moving and having this big family was like, you got to know what to do next.
right.
It's like big survival skill I learned. So anyway, I got really into like drugs, drinking, partying, like a lot of things people do in college. But then most people, I think, at some point say, okay, well, I can't keep doing this and pass. So
Yeah.
let me find a little more balance. And I never really could seem to do that. You know, I just kept getting more and more into it. And I loved meeting people that were also on that path because they were like pissed off too. And
Yeah.
interesting, they were interesting people. And a lot of times from a completely different walk of life than me. And I was really fascinated by it. And so I was not on a good path, to be honest. I mean, I'm like summarizing, 5 or so years of my life here. And so I really kind of got in, with the wrong crowd, and to be honest. But I really loved it. Like I would never take this part of my life back. You know, like it was gangster. I wanted to be like, the only white girl in like a Snoop video. That was sort of like my dream. I just was it's such an horrible place. Anyway, so then something very profound happened to me when I was 8 months pregnant with my son. I knew that my son's dad was not someone that was going to be around for me.
Mm. Yeah. Okay.
And so I started kind of like thinking, all right, I got to get a plan together. Like this shit got really real. And I have to quit partying and just, you know, being pissed off and saying fuck it all the time, and this whole attitude I had gotten on. So my mom passed away really suddenly when
Uh,
I was 8 months pregnant with my son, like in the middle of the night, no
oh,
warning,
oh,
nothing. And so our relationship was pretty tumultuous at the time, with good reason. I was really doing some fuck shit. And this is not what she wanted for me. She wanted me to, I already told you what she wanted for me. So
right.
anyway, so that happened, you know, and it was like such a life defining moment. And
For sure.
so that was on April 4th. And then my son was born on May 25th. And so things got really clear for me of like, okay, I know what I need to do now. I need to go finish this degree. Um, I gotta get my shit cleaned up. I gotta, start like taking care of myself, getting out of this crowd. Um, like, what do I want my life to be like? And I kind of like looking back on it now, I think I pushed a bunch of stuff down and just got really focused on survival. At this point, my dad and I started to kind of move in a different direction with our relationship. We became a lot deeper, a lot more friend-like, because my dad was in shock,
Mhm.
and I was wanting to help him, and I think he was wanting to help me. Like, oh my God, he had 5 kids. He knew what was coming for me, and I was just like, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna be this single parent, and I got it. And he was like, dying. I think like, holy shit, do you know? Anyway, so I finished my degree just to kind of bring this along, and I got a degree in journalism. When I found journalism, it was so beautiful because I was like, oh, these are things that came easy to me. Talking to people, looking for meaning in things, understanding why it's important, writing. I always loved to write. I loved to read when I was a kid, also. I should have told you that. And then what I liked about it the most was I knew I didn't really ever have to commit to anything. So they
Yeah.
said, oh, yeah, you could write this story, like a traffic accident at 9 a.m. and then at 5 p.m., well, or the next day. I was always in a newspaper, not in TV,
Yeah.
but you would be able to write something on like a completely different subject matter.
Right.
And I loved that. I was like, and I could get paid to do this. Like, I loved it. Um, and so when I went back to finish my degree and I was like, not high all the time or hungover, and I was going to class and I was applying myself, I had such a different experience. I had these 2 professors that really kind of took me under their wing, both women. And so, to make a long story short, I somehow got this. I did a couple internships, and then I got this job at the Nashville Business Journal. I loved journalism. I could never make enough money doing it to really support myself and my son. So, through a series of relationships and stuff, like in the business world, I got into communications consulting. Um, and that kind of led me to my creation of a company that I formed with some other people in the healthcare space. So I wrote about the business of healthcare, which I did not know at the time was like a really big deal in Nashville. It was the biggest industry, I think still is.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so then I was like, oh wow, I'm in this interesting universe. There's all these people like buying and starting these companies. They have, you know, they're like big time, like the largest hospital company in the world is based here, and I had kind of like access to these people and I found it fascinating. It was like people buying and selling and starting these companies, and there was always something to write about. And it was like I'd been dropped in this little universe. And then when I got to be in the communications consulting side of things, I felt like I got deeper into it. So I was asked to like come up with these solutions. And I did so many cool things, Visha. Like I would travel around the United States working mainly on like hospital mergers and acquisitions in these little towns, and this was when a lot of like companies were consolidating rural hospitals, and it would be like these little towns, man. If I ever write a book, like you could not make this stuff up that was happening, and it was so fascinating. And I would just think like, how are we, like one of them was in Louisiana, by the way. It was so interesting.
Not
Um,
surprised.
yeah. And so, it was like really cool because people were like, well, what do we do? Help us. How do we talk
Yeah.
about this? How do we get people to vote for this merger? And so it was like important. It was high stakes. It impacted a lot of people. Every community needs a hospital. There were all these characters involved because in these little community hospitals, the doctors and stuff were really interesting. Don't get me wrong, but then you had community people as like board members a lot of times.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so it was the dynamics of that. And, it was like, I loved it. It was so fascinating. Well, I was thinking about this, by the way, a lot since we've been talking about this podcast. And you always ask me these great questions. And a real common theme for me, this is one of the things I know to be true about myself at this point in life, is like, I really learn well from pain and suffering. Like, that was the greatest teacher for me. And so, like, I was broke, Visha. I was like so poor,
Yeah, I hear you. I hear you.
Yeah, and I had a son, and he was like 5 or 6, and
You just making shit happen.
I
Making
wanted
shit
to
happen.
send him to like a good school, and so I really wanted to send him to university school because I had discovered it, and it was like racially diverse, all these really smart people, interesting, and then they told me it was going to be like $25,000 a year or something. This is 27 years ago, and I only made like 38, you know or something, I don't know, something like that.
You're right.
And so yeah, I was just like, oh shit, So just I was I was really tired of being broke. I knew that things were going to financially increase the needs for my son, and like I wanted stuff. I wanted to have a nice, him to go to a good school. I wanted to have I would say a nice home, but at that point I was living in like a 2-bedroom duplex, with no central heat and air and no dishwasher and behind a gas station off White Bridge Road, So it was like I had a car that my dad got for me when I was pregnant that was like a 1993 Honda Accord, and pieces of it were literally falling off, And so I was like, man, I love this journalism thing. But so it was really practical for me. Our mutual friend, David Fox said, I get it. Let me help you with some interviews. So I talked to the Wall Street Journal and to the Associated Press. And
Wow.
both of those things, to make a long story short, entailed moving to another city where I had no support. My dad and my sister and her husband and her family were still here. And I was going to be in a big city and not making much money there either. So like, 60 grand in New York in 2004 was not shit, And
Right.
so I was like, man, I'm tired of this being brokenness.